Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of CVtv Workshops. My name is Carlos, your host, and my co-host David Dakin from CoralVue. How are you, Dave?
Doing good, man. How's it going today?
I'm doing well. I had a little bit of a, emergency going on, a little bit earlier this week, but everything is okay. I think we got it. The HYDROS saved the day again,
You too.
You know what? That rope leak detector is a blessing. You know what? And maybe one day we'll do an episode on what happened. But all right, so Dave, what are we talking about today? What are we talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about pH today, Carlos. And,
okay.
Well, if anybody doesn't know, pH stands for potential of hydrogen or power of hydrogen. But it's basically a measure of acidity or basicity or basic in our aquariums, or just in general of a 0 to 14 scale, 7 being neutral. The lower you go on the scale, the more acidic, and above 7, it goes to alkaline or basicity. So we talking about that and how we measure it and what it actually does for our aquariums.
So you bring up a good point. So pH for those scientists is it's a hydrogen ion concentration in the water. That's pretty much what it is, But like Dave so eloquently said, it's literally you either have an acidic solution or you have a basis solution. And you know what, in aquarium that makes a world of difference for corals. It makes the world difference for fish. Yeah. You know what? Even if you have freshwater tank, it makes a world of difference for plants. Yeah. And let's talk about something common. If anybody knows, I'm not a gardener, but I know the gardener, and I hear sometimes it's like, oh, you can't do tomatoes because the soil is the pH is too high or it's too low. So every organic organism is affected by pH. Even us as humans, we are affected. Our bodies, certain pH. I don't know what the medical term for that is, but every organism is. So how does pH apply to aquarium?
Yeah, pH. We think about in terms of what it does for corals, and we typically shooting for something in the 8.0 to 8.3 range, and that pH allows for the calcium uptake, and it allows for the alkalinity in the water, the uptake. And you really need to be, I find in all my experience, that pH plays such a critical part in the growth rates that we see in corals. It being in an office environment here, it really plays havoc with the humans emitting CO2 as we breathe, and that plummets your pH level. So yeah, it's how do we overcome these environmental aspects in order to keep our pH where we want to see it within the aquarium.
Yeah. So let's go over the pH. Why are we measuring pH? And like Dave said, pH affects the coral growth, the calcification process. Corals are, they build this calcium skeleton, and they pull building blocks. They pull magnesium, they pull calcium, and they pull alkalinity from the water, and then in a process of calcification, they build the skeleton. Okay, and pH actually has a say on how fast or how slow this calcification will happen. So what we have is, if the pH is high, then we have a process where the coral is able to intake a lot of calcium, a lot of magnesium, a lot of alkalinity, and build skeleton, build it strong. But then on the other side, if the pH is too low, what starts to happen is that process of intaking starts to slow down. So then the coral can only grab so much, and it's a slow process. And you know what? Not the funny, but the amazing thing about it is that if your pH goes too low, actually the process reverses. And instead of intaking, then the coral starts to melt and expel. After obviously the coral will die, but after that, the skeleton will start to melt and go back to those basic trace elements, which technically is what happened with your calcium reactor. In a calcium reactor, that is the purpose of a calcium reactor. You put media inside, calcium media, and then you drop the pH so that it slowly releases that calcium media into the water. So then it goes to your tank, where in your tank, the corals will intake it back. So that's technically what happens.
Like this give and take effect we're trying to manage within our aquariums when you run in a calcium reactor.
Exactly.
It's like here I'm trying to keep 6.8, but in the tank I'm trying to keep above 8, and it's this give and take and battle you're trying to.
Exactly. Which brings me to the question is, what is the normal, or what do I aim when it comes to pH? What level do I aim? Let's compare it to natural seawater. What's the level? What's the pH level of natural seawater?
Yeah. Is that 8.0 or
8.2 to 8.3? So 8.0 to 8.3. Obviously, this is an average between all the reefs in the world. Some reefs are different than others, but that's what you're aiming for. So if you were to try to keep your pH in your tank between 8 and 8.3, you pretty much would have a greater chance of success, keeping the corals and making them grow. Now there's an argument that you could speed up the process of calcification by raising the pH. You could do that. Some people say yes, some people say no. Here is the things that you have to take into consideration when you do that. It is, some fish don't like higher pH. Some fish like lower pH. Some invertebrates do also. So you got to be careful. You got to do your homework and research what kind of fish you have, what kind of invertebrates you have, and based on that, then it tells you what's your pH range it is. Also, you have to be careful, because if you raise that pH, you get the corals to grow too fast. And what happens when they grow fast is that then the skeleton is porous. It's very brittle. It's very brittle. So then you get this coral that's growing fast, but if a fish just swings by, it'll just break. And that's not good for the coral too. So for those of you that are thinking, I want speed, you have to be careful not to go too fast, because then if you do that, then you end up with brittle corals. So some of the true testament of a nice coral is when you grab it, it's sturdy. The tips don't melt, they don't fall apart, they don't crumble. And when you have a coral that doesn't crumble, that means it's grown correctly. If you have a coral that is crumbling, that means that it probably grew a little too faster than it should have, and you have to take precautions to make sure that you don't damage it. Everything is good in moderation, right? Which brings me to the next point is stability. I mean, why do we look at the pH? Why are we talking about pH? At the end of the day, pH is a measurement of stability. And everything, Dave, we both know, the more stable your tank is, the greater chance of success. Things are not going to die. Things are going to grow slowly but surely. This is not a marathon, guys. This is this is not a race. This is not the 100 meter. This is a marathon, and you got to do it slowly. You got to do it right. So stability is it's key. Which
it's not always about chasing those numbers, and trying. I'm above 8.3. I got to get this down, or it's just patience, stability, and making small changes and observing as you do changes.
The thing about it is that stability and chasing numbers are in opposite ends. Because the fact that you're chasing numbers means your tank is going up and down because you're making changes, and so that stability is going away. So I mean, I am not of the school of thought to chase numbers. And a lot of the friends that I have that have been here forever and grow corals for a living, they'll tell you it's like they don't chase numbers. Some of them, if you ask them what's the pH in your tank, they'll be like, oh, I don't know. Last time I tested, it was like 8.3. It's the complete opposite of some folks that are like, they micromanaging the tank, and by micromanaging things, they're making it worse sometimes. Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad, but if you micromanage, you have to be very careful of how you micromanage so you don't overdo changes and you end up creating this swing, which which does happen. So stability is key. Don't chase numbers. You know what? pH is going to go up and down, right, Dave?
Absolutely.
In the morning, when the lights turn on, your pH is going to spike up. And then when the lights turn off in the middle of the day, if you test your tank at 2 o'clock in the morning when the lights have been off for a few hours, the pH is going to be lower.
Well, you can see that on your hydros if you look at your graph and just look at the day cycle. I mean, it just looks over the days. This is what you see.
Exactly. And then you touched this upon a little bit earlier, but then you're talking about there are so many factors that contribute to how pH reacts. I mean, we're talking about CO2, like you said. Me breathing in this room, expels CO2, which then turns around and brings the pH down in my tank.
Right.
So down in New Orleans, here in Chicago, right now you guys close windows, AC is on, so your CO2 is probably going to be above 1,000 parts per million in the room, compared to about 450, 400. That is what is normal outside. Yeah.
So and the more people, the more CO2 emitting, and that pH you can see will plummet. And we're in here in the office, there may be 15 people in there, and I was just constantly battling with low pH.
Yes.
And one way around that is I brought the skimmer line outside. So ran a long hose from the skimmer intake for the air, put the line outside, and now my pH 8.3 max during the day down to about 8.05 at night at the lowest point. And I can religiously see that every day doing it. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I'm not running a calcium reactor on my tank at this time. So that's another factor that you have to weigh in, where you're battling, and maybe it's more difficult to obtain those numbers.
Yes, it is. I mean, I run a calcium reactor in my tank, so I am constantly battling the pH because the water, the effluent, as we call it, and for those newbies, effluent is the water that's coming out of this reactor, that we're dropping the pH so we can melt the media and then get that water full of calcium and elements back into the tank, so then the corals that are living can absorb it. But anyway, that calcium reactor runs around 6.8, 6.9, depending on how much my alkalinity is, and it goes right into the tank. So I have this constant water that's coming into the tank. There's around 725, 7 something like that, and at the same time, I'm trying to keep this main tank right here above 8, which is, it's impossible sometimes. So then I get into the point where I've done the same thing, where I've run the skimmer line outside. That didn't work so well because it was too far. I've tried CO2 scrubbers, so the CO2 scrubber is a little filter, and you'll see there's a picture on the screen that is showing you, but a CO2 scrubber is you connect the skimmer air intake into the scrubber, so the air is pulled through the scrubber, which a scrubber means removes the CO2 from the air, and then it goes into the skimmer that gets mixed pretty abruptly into the water. So technically you're trying to expel the CO2 out of it.
Right.
I've tried that too, but the most efficient way for me to keep that CO2, keep the pH up, is a saltwater reactor.
Yeah. And do you drip that overnight where you're battling the lowest pH?
You know what?
Constant.
I drip it all day long.
Really?
All day long. all day long. You know, I should drip it during the night, so then there's not so much of a spike. But again, I don't chase numbers.
Right.
I don't chase numbers. I'm more concerned. I know that my tank, because of where I live in Chicago, and I'm in a relatively new house, so you know, the insulation is pretty high. I know that my tank will never go above 8.3. I mean, that's a pipe dream for me. Yeah. You know, if I get to 8.1, I'm happy. So, but I'm more concerned about nighttime, that I don't go below 7.75 or 7.7. And sometimes I've seen it go down to 7.5.
Wow.
7.5. But again, I'm not chasing numbers. So if it goes down 7.5 once, I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
You know, if it's constantly at 7.5, that's a different story.
So you use a calcwasser as your top off?
No, well, kind of. So what I do is I have a calcwasser reactor connected to an FX STP, the Camora FX STP. And the beauty, what I like about the Camora FX STP is that it can run 24/7.
Correct.
It's not a regular dosing pump that has a limited, you know, and the motor, all motors have a limited lifetime, but the regular dosing pumps are not meant to run 24/7.
Correct.
Okay. The FX STP you can actually run it, and then you can dial it down, so you can slow down the motor to slow down. So technically what I do is I put in about 5 milliliters per minute of calcwasser all day long.
Okay. And that keeps you at what? What is your pH stay?
It ranges between 7 3/4 and about 8.1.
Okay.
7 3/4 and about 8.1. That's what it does. And that's how I keep it at. It's it saves me the headaches, and it works very well. The only thing I'm going to say, I'm going to warn for those of you that want to try this, is you have to make sure that the 5 milliliters that I do is because 5 milliliters does not exceed the amount of evaporated water in my tank during the day. Okay. So because then if you're adding too much, then what happens is you're exceeding the evaporating water. So you start adding more fresh water to the tank, and your salinity is going to drop. So you got to make sure that the calcwasser that you're adding is less than the amount of water you're evaporating. So that's what it is. So the calcwasser is dosing 24/7, and then the ATO just works the same way it does all the time, and that's how it works. Yeah, and you see my tank. I mean, my tank that stuff just grows like weeds. I mean, it just grows. So
we need to see some more pictures of your tank.
I know. One of these days I'll do that. Yeah. But don't chase them. I don't chase numbers. It's not something I do. And my corals grow great. If your corals are not growing and you're looking at your pH, please, pH is just one out of many things that contribute to the growth of a coral. So, I wouldn't go in there and start changing my pH to whatever I have it and expect the growth rate to be the same way. I think it changes. It changes depending on water quality, trace elements, lights, and flow. And there's so many other things that contribute to that. It's not as simple as just one thing. Right. All right. So we talked about pH and how it relates to corals and everything. Now, how can we measure pH? Is there an easy way to measure it? Actually,
pH probes.
Yep, pH probes. I got one right here. We're going to show you that. I have my little glass pH probe right here that I'm going to show you with.
pH probes being the easiest, I guess. There are still pH test kits that you can manually test your pH with, and little dip strips. But typically now, for the most part, I think people are using probes. And there's, standalone pH monitors. And of course, pH probes, and that's what something we kind of proud of with the HYDROS, Carlos, and what we're doing in measuring pH with our digital galvanic isolation, and that's a little bit more on the technical side, and maybe we'll talk about that again in a future episode of how we're doing that. But it's something we're proud of, and we can, better explain how we're able to get some more accurate and filtering
Yes.
with our circuitry.
And we'll get to that a little bit later in the show, but just to be transparent, and I know this, there's people out there saying, well, pH probes are not meant to be in a tank measuring 24/7. And that's true. That is absolutely true. They're not meant to do that. At the same time, two things. That is, the pH probe is the quote unquote pseudo standard that over the time has been adapted in the aquarium hobby. Everybody has equipment that works with the pH probes. And second of all, this is, for the regular hobbyist, it's not a lab. It's not a lab. If I had a lab and I had things that are based that will, it's life and death based on the pH, then obviously I would use a different equipment. But it's the aquarium. It's a different one. You have to weigh the needs of the many and the price. And the pH probe, while it's not ideal based on some people's train of thought, it does get the job done.
Yeah.
It does get the job done.
Yeah.
All right. So the HYDROS controller can actually, the pH probe, and now we can actually connect the pH probe to a HYDROS controller, right?
Yeah.
And then the HYDROS controller is going to tell you when the pH drops, what's the pH, and even turn things on based on the pH of your tank, which is kind of cool.
Right.
I get the notifications and everything. So we're going to do that. We're watching CVtv workshops today. We're talking about pH, which is a really cool topic. We're not getting into the nitty gritty of, how to measure pH, how does the probe works. We're getting into why should you measure pH and how, at what levels should you be keeping the pH, which is, I think, is the more important thing. If you like the show, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like, or, hit the little bell, and you'll be notified right away that we have a show. Also, if you have any questions, we have a brand new CoralVue Facebook group. That you can join us. So it's called Facebook CoralVue Cares, right?
Yeah, Cares.
Cares. It's CARES. And the acronym, pretty much, we'll have it. It's on the screen right there. Bless you. This is the thing about doing live work.
It's live.
It is live. You know what? And you're at CoralVue office, which means that there's people doing work there.
Exactly.
So just say bless you there from Carlos and everybody. I'm sure some people on the screen actually said bless you, which is kind of cool. Anyway, CoralVue Cares on Facebook. Please join us. We talk about corals, we talk about tanks, we talk about aquarium, and it's an inclusive, all-inclusive community.
Yep.
The only rule, the cardinal rule is no bullying. No bullying.
Yeah, be kind.
Be kind. Exactly.
We all here to learn. Look, I've been doing this for, I don't know, since I'm 8 years old, and I'm still learning.
Exactly.
It's just the hobby will humble you if you think you know it all. So exactly. So please, let's talk, share ideas. We invite anybody with any questions. Come on in, check it out.
Be open-minded, and I'm going to say this, If you're one of those people that feels the need to scream and insult at somebody to get your point across, this is not the group for you, and please don't come. We don't want you there. Okay. So anyway, CoralVue Cares, which is a Facebook group, is awesome. I love it. And then also, if you have any questions on the CoralVue HYDROS product, we have our forum at coralvuehydros.com, and where we have a world of information, DIY, how to set things up. It's a great community of people that are willing to help each other. It's amazing how much we're a small group. We're just starting. But man, there are people out there that are really hardcore users, and the great thing about them is that they're willing to help even the newbies, which is a great thing. So please visit us at CoralVue forum at coralvuehydros.com. And then also, if you have any questions about the product, you can always reach us at support.coralvue.com. you know, and those are more intricate products. If you have a question or something, you don't feel comfortable in the forum, you don't feel comfortable on Facebook, or maybe you asked it on the forum and nobody answered the question, then please just head over to support.coralvue.com, and we'll be able to, one of our techs will be happy to help you and even get on the phone or maybe remote into your control and figure out what the issue is. So we have many ways for you to contact us to get help and support with our CoralVue HYDROS product. So Dave, this is great. I want to say hello to everybody again. More people here. I see Michael is here. I see Ricardo is here. Chris is here as well. So thank you so much for watching. On the next segment of the show, we're going to be talking about how to add the HYDROS, the pH probe to the HYDROS unit. But before that, I hear this like some top secret information that we're getting declassified.
Really? Yeah.
I know, I heard. So let's watch this little video first.
Yep.
This is just the beginning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to CVtv Workshops. My name is Carlos, your host, and my co-host David Dockin from CoralVue. And we are talking about pH. How are we doing, Dave?
Doing good, man. We back.
You know, it's great. We're all sharing information here, you know, personal stories and you know, opinions. Let me put it that way, right? Opinions.
Yeah,
Take it or leave it, just from somebody.
Share knowledge.
Yeah, just share knowledge, first-hand experience. So let's talk about the pH on the HYDROS.
Yep.
And what's different about the pH on the HYDROS that is different than other controllers?
Well, I think the biggest thing is our digital galvanic isolation.
And in layman terms, what does that mean?
It's the way we isolate the circuitry within the PCB, and we're able to have filtering where you have a pure or unnoise regulated from the other circuitry within the board that can make a false reading or numbers within what you're actually viewing on your app.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. So everything electrical produces a field, a noise, some kind of electrical noise that could interfere with other components that are also creating electrical noise.
Correct.
So they could interfere and throw the readings off. Now, obviously, if you're talking about, you know, a pump that is pulling, you know, 120 volts, or, you know, that's a lot of power that it doesn't interference from other things is not going to be enough to cause a problem. But with pH, we're talking about millivolts, like tiny, this very faint electrical current that is coming from the probe through the wire into the HYDROS control. And you know, when you have this tiny, very faint amount of current and electricity coming in there, that is susceptible to noise, right?
Correct. Yeah.
All right.
So we're looking for the truest reading that we can get from that probe back to the HYDROS device that you're going to view and make your decisions on your aquarium health. So
okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, that was, you know, we spent a lot of time in doing that circuit, and we're the engineers here pretty proud of it, and It will reflect in the reading you get, and also in how you calibrate and set up the probe.
Exactly. And you know, the isolation happens at the circuit board. So when you connect this probe to the HYDROS, it is goes into this tiny circuit board. And this tiny circuit board is then isolated from the rest of the HYDROS board, from the rest of the sensors, temperature sensors, drive ports, producing electricity or receiving electricity. This is all isolated. So the noise from all the other components of the board won't affect the pH reading. And that's what we have. Now, there are other controllers out there that have this, they have a, what we think is, it's not a full isolation, right?
Yeah.
And it's like they isolate the reading from the outside of the controller, but they don't isolate the reading from other components within that controller itself. So you have other, so technically you could have a temperature sensor, you could have an ORP sensor, you could have something else that is causing noise, and that will affect the reading because the probe circuitry is not isolated from the rest of the components in the board. In the HYDROS, the probe circuitry is isolated from that as well. Correct? That's the layman's, the simplest way I
We
can
can get a lot
explain it.
more technical, and maybe we bring Don or some of his guys in another episode and really explain that. But you know, for layman's terms, I think that's pretty well said. Okay.
So then that brings me to the next point. It's like, so if the probe is isolated the way it is from the HYDROS, does that mean I have to calibrate the HYDROS or no? Can I get away without calibration? Yeah.
You can. Yep.
You can actually. And that's what we recommend actually. So when you're calibrating, you know, in the hobby, you say, listen, you have to calibrate the pH probe. Technically, you're not calibrating the pH probe. You're calibrating the HYDROS control to the reading on the pH that the pH probe is sending and making it and creating a base point. Correct?
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. So you're putting the probe in a solution that is 7 pH. And it's going to send, and then it's going to send this signal, and the controller is going to take a snapshot of this voltage that is the probe is sending it, and then the controller is going to say, okay, this voltage means 7. Then I put the probe in 4. It sends a signal. This voltage means 4, and the same thing with 10. So technically, you're not calibrating the probe. You're calibrating the controller to the probe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Hey, you know what? I'm not an engineer, but I'm getting this. I know you have a much better knowledge of electricity than I do. So
so one of the things a lot of people ask, well, how do I know when the pH probe needs to be replaced, or when is it bad? And that's really kind of a guessing game. They can try and calibrate it against the reference solution, but really it's kind of a guess at that point.
Right. But with the HYDROS, but with the HYDROS, we actually have, it actually gives you the actual voltage reading. And it compares it to the previous time you calibrated. And if the deviation is too great, you know, as the probe decays, that deviation becomes greater and greater and greater. So if the deviation is this small, then you can calibrate and it's fine. If the deviation is this small, then you calibrate. But you know what? You should really think about changing the probe. If the deviation is, you know, this big gap, then probably you need to replace the probe by now, because probably it's too much of a deviation.
And we do give that reference on the HYDROS.
And we're going to talk about that later. So let's talk about adding the pH probe to the HYDROS. And this is something that we can do in under 30 seconds. But obviously, because we're doing it here live as a workshop, we're going to slow down and do it in a minute. Okay. All right. So let's try it. Our April showed that my HYDROS here, and it's my handy dandy CoralVue Controller 4. Now, before we start, you know what? And I'm sorry, April. Let's go back to my screen here. The HYDROS controller is compatible with pH probes that come with a BNC port. Take a look at this. And, there's a picture on the screen that's showing you a BNC port. I get a lot of questions. I have a pH probe from a different company. Can I use it with the HYDROS? And my answer is, it depends. And God, everybody hates me for that one. But yeah, it is. But yeah, no, it's simple. If your pH probe has a BNC port, then it is compatible with the HYDROS, no matter what brand it is. As long as it's got a BNC port, you're fine. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this BNC port, and I'm going to connect it to the HYDROS 4 here. The HYDROS 4, Control 4, comes with two probes, two BNC ports. And the BNC ports are for both pH and ORP. What this means is I have two ports. I can connect two pH probes, or I can connect two ORP probes, or I can connect one of each. It doesn't matter. The port can be used for two things. So in the app software, we're going to tell the HYDROS that port 1 is using a pH, and then if we had a port 2 in an ORP probe, then I would tell the HYDROS, okay, port 2 is an ORP probe. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my BNC connector here to port 1, and it's the blue port. All right, and I have that pH in there. So let's go into my HYDROS app in here, and I'm going to share that. Here you go, everybody. And I have this little simple controller, nothing to it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to inputs. So let's go ahead and do inputs, add an input, create a new one, and let's call it pH. That seems right. That seems pretty simple, right? Type. Let's go ahead and do probe port. Remember, it's a pH probe, so it's a probe port. Okay, probe mode. Remember how we talked about the probe can be pH or ORP, so just got to tell the software what it is. So in this case, it's pH. Now the probe port, remember, the Control 4 comes with probe 1 and probe 2. And as we saw on the commercial with the big declassified information, there's another device that comes with a single probe. So we're going to go ahead and do that as well. So let's see, and probe 1, port 1, and then safe range low and safe range high. This is just for me to have the HYDROS either tell me the pH is too low or pH is too high. That depends. Obviously, if I have a planted tank, then the range will be separate or different than a reef tank. So for this case right now, I'm going to do 7.5 to 8.5. So if my pH dips below 7.5, I like the warning. If my pH is higher than 8.5, then I like a warning. Temperature input. Temperature affects pH. Okay, so if you have a temperature probe, it's a good idea to actually tie the temperature probe in here. Now, granted, you have some argument that says that if your reef tank is stable, the temperature is going to be 78, 79, 80 degrees, whatever it is always going to be stable. So the temperature may not be such a big deal to do it. I always do it anyway, just because it's there. But some people argue that the difference between temperature adjustment and non-temperature adjustment is so minuscule that it doesn't make a difference. It's up to you on that one. And then we're going to go ahead and calibrate the probe. But like Dave and I talked about that, the HYDROS has such state-of-the-art hardware that what I recommend is just go ahead and upload the changes. Don't calibrate. Just go ahead and upload the changes. And then once you upload the changes, then let's go ahead and status. And let's see if we can get a reading from the control here. 7.97, which, you know what, that is the pH of my water right here because it's coming directly from my tank, and my tank is around 8. So amazingly, as we talked about it with Dave, look at that, 7.97, and when my tank is at 8, without any calibration, the probe is working. Which tells me it's a pretty damn good probe right now that doesn't need any calibration at all. What do you think about that, Dave?
Pretty nice.
I mean, it took us, what, 30 seconds to do this?
It can't get any easier, huh?
It cannot get any easier than this. So that's how you do a pH, to add a pH probe. Now I can take that pH probe and add it to my calcium reactor, or I can take a pH probe and add it to my saltwater reactor, create other things. But technically, that's all I need. It's a pH probe, and that was it. That's how easy it is. Okay, now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to calibrate the probe.
Yep.
All right. So what we're going to do is, let's say that the probe is not working correctly. It needs to be calibrated. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back into the probe right here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit on the recalibrate. But before we do that, we're going to do one, take out our little calibration fluid, and you're going to tap it dry, and then you're going to put that probe into the liquid. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that probe into the liquid, and I'm going to hit recalibrate. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wait 2 minutes. You're going to set your clock, and you're literally going to wait 2 minutes. And what's going to do is it's going to allow the probe to stabilize. Okay. So we're going to let the probe stabilize as much as possible. As you can see on the screen, it started about 25, right, Dave? And now it went to about 10. And now it's at 6.5, and now it's 5. So it's still changing. It's still stabilizing itself. The probe is acclimating to the liquid that is known to be 7.01 pH. So we're just going to keep it at that, and then look at that. For the purposes of time, we're going to call this 2 minutes. And it's because look at the probe. The probe stabilizes at 16.25, and it hasn't changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and accept. And then what I'm going to do is then you're going to go ahead and grab that probe. You're going to go ahead and rinse the probe with RODI water, tap it dry carefully. You don't want to break it. And then put it in the 10.01 calibration liquid. And you're going to do exactly the same. Put it in the liquid, wait 2 minutes, wait until this stabilizes. And then it's like, if it stabilizes before 2 minutes, I would recommend just continue to wait the 2 minutes and then hit accept. That's the best way to do it. If you hit accept too soon, then the probe will calibrate incorrectly and you're going to get a bad reading. So, once you get that calibration done, then you go ahead and upload the changes. Now, the one thing that people ask, Dave, is like, do I need to calibrate all 3 liquids, or can I just get away with 2, or can I just get away with 1? Technically, you should always calibrate first. One thing, you calibrate the 7 first. Always calibrate the 7 first. And then if you have a regular fish tank where you're measuring, where your readings are always going to be between 7 and 10, they're always going to be in that range, then what I would recommend is calibrate 7 and 10. Don't worry about 4. If you're running a calcium reactor or some kind of device or something else that where your readings are always going to fall between 7 and 4, then calibrate 7 and 4. Don't worry about the 10. So if you have a reef tank and you're putting the probe in the reef tank, in the tank, then you calibrate 7 and 10 and call it a day. If you're using that probe for a calcium reactor, then that calcium reactor, the reading is always going to be between 7 and 4 because you're aiming around 6, 6.9, 6.8, 6.5. So then what I would do is calibrate the 7 and calibrate the 4. Don't worry about the 10. That's how you do it. And that's how easy you calibrate. So it's not hard to calibrate, but you have to have the patience. Again, it is important. I cannot emphasize, you need to wait the 2 minutes. Put the probe in the liquid, hit the recalibrate, and wait 2 minutes. That's all you need.
I noticed the color change and as it's reading. Can you tell us about that?
Exactly. So what we do is we have a color changing depending on the voltage. Now, this is not a hard, the probe is bad, you need to change it, or the probe is good. It's just, hey, the probe is, if it's within 10 millivolts, then, we consider that an acceptable variance. So the probe is still good. If the probe is the variance is between 10 and 20, then we consider that, it's okay. You can still use it, but probably it would be time to order a pH probe now. Now, if you were to calibrate and the millivolts falls above 10, the deviance is above 10, then it's going to give you a red number. And at that point, you probably are looking into replacing the pH probe. Again, this is not hard. This is not you have to replace the pH probe. You can still continue to use it. It's just the way of the HYDROS to say, hey, heads up, this probe is a little bit off. You should change it, or hey, heads up, this probe is really off. Please change it. But you can still save it and continue to use it. It's, it's not going to force you to get a new probe, but it's going to tell you about it.
So green meaning it's closest. It's a new probe. It's properly calibrated. And
Yes.
orange meaning it's deviating further away from that baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And red meaning, okay, now you may really want to look into replacing this probe.
Replacing it. Exactly. If you fall in red, what I recommend is first, before you go and replace it or anything like that, just try calibrating it again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, try calibrating it again. Maybe, you know what? Rinse it with RO water. Look at it. Sometimes there's calcification. So grab a little brush and carefully just clean it, because that calcification will interfere with the reading. So just clean it and everything, and then rinse it with RODI water, then pat it dry so there's no water, and then put it back in there. Wait 2 minutes, hit the recalibrate, and see if it happens again. Sometimes that's all it takes, just a little cleaning from the gunk, and then you're back to normal. After cleaning, if it's still red, then probably you should consider purchasing a new probe.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So the HYDROS not only tells you, you know, we did it this way because that not only tells you, you know, we're not saying the probe is bad. We're telling you why it's bad, because you're actually seeing the millivolts. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of telling you how bad it is, so that you can tell it's like, you know what, the probe is way off. Let's go ahead and change it. Or this probe, you know what, I can live with this. It's fine. You know, so not only we're giving you information so you can make an educated decision. And that's the whole point about the HYDROS system. You know?
Yep.
So that's how you do it. I mean, I'm not going to do the 10 pH calibration because it's the same way. Again, just put the probe in the calibration fluid, wait 2 minutes, hit the recalibrate, make sure it's stable, and then accept. And that's all you do. And then if I go back to my live, see, then it's reading 6.95 because it has been sitting on the 7 fluid. So you can see it's a little off.
Mm-hmm.
The probe is a little off. It's a little off. And also the fact of the matter is that this little water has been sitting in the open air for a while. So that also affects that pH. You know, you guarantee the 7 pH when you crack that blister open. But the longer it stays open, then the pH is going to start to deviate.
Right.
You know, because then just like any other water, any other liquid, CO2 and other things start to contribute and deviate that. So
that's why I like the stuff in the blister packs, because you know it's fresh open, and I stick the probe in right there and don't waste a lot of time.
Exactly.
And when I'm done with it, throw it away.
Throw it away.
It's like $1, but it's disposable.
If you use the blister or whatever you use, just got to make sure that you use it quickly, because the longer it stays out exposed to the elements, to the room temperature and room elements and air, the pH will start to deviate.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. All right. So as you can see right here on the screen, look at it. The pH probe is saying that my pH is 7.0, and it's going up because I transferred it to my regular water, but it's 7.8, which is below 7.5. So it's giving me a warning.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm actually getting some emails right now telling me that it is off. You know, so that's how easy it is. I'm going to, you know, let's go ahead and have April bring us back to the screen right here. You know, so Dave, what do you think of the pH? You know,
it's
easy,
just,
right?
So easy. And that's, you know, what we set out to do with all of this, with HYDROS, and trying to make the slogan is automation for everyone, aquarium automation for everyone. And just sit here and do this coding and all of this, you know, it's just wasn't necessary. So
exactly. And I was able to do all that. I was able to tell it to give me an alarm. I was able to give it a range from 7.5 to 8.5. And I did not have to write a single line of code. I didn't have to do that. And you know, the great thing about it also is that my WYSIWYG, the little interface, that if I want to make changes, I go back to that interface and I can make changes on that nice little form. You know, some controllers out there have this, they claim they have a form that does it, but then once you save it, it converts it into this code.
Yeah.
And then if I want to go back and make changes, then I have to make changes to the code and not the little form that I had where everything was simple. You know,
Right.
so it's like, what's
Yeah,
the point of that?
Exactly. It's like a hack almost. And
Exactly. So no, with the HYDROS, that form, if I go back and make changes, I will see that form and it'll be very easy for me to make changes, no code necessary. And that's the great thing about it. Well, Dave, I want to say thank you to our viewers right here. You know, we thank you to Jeff, thank you to Michael, thank you to Chris, thank you for Wendy and Jeremy, everybody helping out and answering questions. We appreciate that. This is CVtv Workshops. We're talking about pH. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, hit the thumbs up, and you'll be notified right away that we have a live show. We might talk about something fun, something technical, whatever, you know, it's like, it's a great learning experience. We always share personal anecdotes and we, you know, things that we've experienced ourselves. If you have any questions about the HYDROS product, please head on over to forum.coralvuehydros.com. There's a great community of users there that are always willing to help. You know, also hit us up, go to Facebook and join our CoralVue Cares group. You know, it's a new community. You can ask anything you want about any product, anything. You know, we're just a community of people that are sharing, you know, even if it's non-CoralVue related, just ask, you know, it's like, I got a new fish. What do you guys think about it? Yeah, please ask us. I mean, you know, chances are some of us with 20 years of experience and between Dave and I, more than 40, 50 years of experience, chances are we've seen the fish before and we could probably share a little information. And there's a lot of people out there that do that too, you know, and if you have a question and it hasn't been answered, then please just head on over to support.coralvue.com. And we have a staff of highly knowledgeable people that are willing to help out and answer your questions, right?
Yep.
Easy ways, very easy ways to get a hold of us. So thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
it was
everybody.
a great show. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Do it again.
And we hope you have a great evening.